Geometry 1, Chapter 5 Test, Topic 6. You should be able to identify if two triangles will be congruent with side, 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 angle, 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 side, or the hypotenuse-Leg theorem. Abbreviated as SSS, SAS, ASA, AAS, or HL. The example. In each of the following pictures, determine if the triangles can be proven congruent. If so, write the rule that proves it and state the congruency statement. If they cannot be proven congruent with the given information, say cannot be determined. Now the congruency statement, this part right here, the congruency statement is when you say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, where you put the letters in the correct order and you actually state their congruency. However, the congruency statement only exists if the triangles are actually congruent. So if you write cannot be determined, then there will not be a congruency statement. You simply write cannot be determined and move on to the next problem. So let's look at this picture. A. We have two triangles here, triangle ABC and ACD, and some information about this triangle. We know we have two congruent sides here, which is helpful. We have a 90-degree angle. Well, that's particularly important because we also have a straight line from D to B. A straight line is going to add up to 180 degrees. This angle here is 90 degrees, which means the other angle above it also must be 90 degrees. So we actually have some congruent angles. We did have to determine that this one would be 90 degrees, but because this one's 90, 90 plus 90 is 180. Now at this exact moment, we don't quite have enough information. We have to keep looking at the picture. But notice, the triangles share a side in the middle. That's called the reflexive property. And the reflexive property says that if the two triangles share the side, that middle side is actually congruent to itself. AC is congruent to CA. And we can put congruency marks there. So let's look at what we have marked in this picture. We have, looking at one triangle, maybe this one right here. Focusing on just one triangle. We have a 90-degree angle. We have congruency marks on two sides. Well, this is called the HL theorem, the hypotenuse-Leg theorem. The hypotenuse-Leg theorem says if you have a right triangle and the hypotenuse and the leg, either leg, are congruent to a second triangle's hypotenuse and leg, that's also 90 degrees, then the two triangles are congruent. So we need to write a congruency statement. Triangle. So I'm going to start at A. And because that's where the 90 degrees is, and let's say you can go either way. Let's do, I don't know, the top triangle first. You can go from A to B, or you can go from A to C. It doesn't particularly matter. Let's go A to B to C. Just because that's alphabetical. Why not? It doesn't particularly matter. What does matter is the second triangle needs to go in a corresponding order. So, in the top triangle, we started at the 90 degrees, which means in this bottom triangle, we need to start at the 90 degrees, which is also angle A. Then from A, we went to B, which is down the side with no tick marks, no congruency symbol. So from A, in the bottom triangle, we need to go down the side with no congruency symbols, A to D. Then if we go from A to D, C has to be the third one because it's the only angle left. And angle ABC is congruent to angle ADC by HL theorem, the hypotenuse-Leg theorem. B. In this picture we have two triangles. We have some congruent angles. Angle Z is congruent to angle X. and angle y down here is congruent to angle y. So angle ZYW is congruent to angle XYW. However, in these pictures, we only have two sets of congruent angles. The angle-angle congruency rule is not an actual rule. We need something else here. But notice again, just like in the previous picture, where these two triangles shared a side, these two triangles also share a side in the middle. So if we just look at one of them, maybe the top triangle right here, what symbols does this triangle have in it? Well, we marked a side. There's an angle marked down here, and there's an angle marked up here. So is there a rule of the 5 that has two angles and a side? Well, there are actually two of them. The angle side angle has two angles and a side, and the angle angle side has two angles and a side. So the question is the side between the angles, angle side angle, or is the side not between the angles, angle angle side? And we look at the picture, focusing on one triangle and one triangle only. Here's one angle, here's the other angle. Is the side that we're going to use the side between them or not? Well, in this case, angle X and angle Y down here in this top triangle are the two angles, and the side that is marked congruent is not between the X and the Y. It's over here, between the W and the Y. So this rule will actually be angle, angle, side. Now we have to put the letters in the correct order. So we pick one of the triangles and we start with it. So I'm going to pick triangle WXY. No particular order, alphabetical, and that's the only preference there. Doesn't really matter though. What does matter is that the second triangle follows the same order. So notice, X is congruent to Z. They're both marked with two tick marks. X came second, which means Z also needs to come second. Y had one tick mark. It's going to be congruent to the Y in the other triangle and needs to come last. Which means the angle without marks up here, W, goes first. Triangle WXY is congruent to triangle WZY by angle, angle, side. Congruency. Let's look at C. In C, this is very nice. Actually, they have some angles or some sides marked congruent. AB is congruent to XY. AC is congruent to ZY. That's great. Angle X is congruent to angle B. We have 3 pieces of information about this picture. Let's just figure out which rule it happens to be. So we have two sides and an angle. So we look at the list of the rules. Which one has two sides and an angle? Two sides and an angle. It would have to be side angle side. And we go back to the picture. If this is side angle side, the angle has to be the angle between the two sides. So let's look at one of the triangles, maybe the top one. One side is from A to B, the other side is from A to C. The angle between the two sides is angle A. Angle B is not actually between them. This would be an attempt at using angle side side as a rule. And angle side side is never going to be a congruency statement or a congruency justification. It's not a congruency rule. So here, although we have two sides and an angle, it's angle side side, which is not actually a rule. So what we write is cannot be determined. It is perfectly fine to not be able to determine whether these triangles are congruent. That's part of the challenge, is identifying that this is not actually one of the rules. So we move on. We don't say that they're congruent because that cannot be determined. We don't state the congruency statement. We move on to the next one. Here, ray BD bisects angle ABC. So the fact that this information is given means we should probably use it somewhere. So what does it mean to bisect? Bi means to cut into two, sect are two pieces, and those two pieces are going to be congruent. So here we are cutting angle ABC into two equal pieces. ABC is this big angle at the top, and it's being cut into two equal angles. So one angle is going to be the left side, and one angle is going to be the right side. BD cuts the big angle ABC into two equal pieces. This is a skill that we use quite a bit in Geometry 1. So please be aware, bisecting an angle means to cut it into two congruent angles. Now what we also have is the same thing we had in A and B, where the two triangles share a side, the reflexive property. And we can focus on one triangle, maybe this one on the right side. In the triangle on the right side, we have a congruent side on the right, we have a congruent side on the left, and we have a congruent angle. Two sides in an angle, just like before. But the question is, where is the angle? Well, if you look at the side BC and you look at the side BD, the angle that is between them is angle B, and that's the one that's marked congruent. This is side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. So we can state the congruency statement, and we start with whichever triangle we want. Triangle A, B, D. I don't know, because it's on the left, it doesn't really matter. Is congruent to triangle. Now, B is congruent to the B in the other triangle, so the B's are both going to go in the middle. The question is, which one comes first, the C or the D? Well, look at where angle A is. Angle A is at the end of the side with one congruent mark. So you want to start at the letter in the other triangle that's at the end of the side with one congruent mark. That's going to be C. C goes first, then B, then D. Bi, side, angle, side, congruency. Now we have two more, because there are 5 rules. So let's look at this one, E. Triangle ABC, triangle XYZ, and this should be a fairly straightforward picture when you look at it. We have 2 sides with 1 tick mark each, 2 sides with 2 tick marks, and 2 sides with 3 tick marks. We know nothing about the angles, but we do know that this triangle has 3 sides that are congruent to this triangle. Well, that's side, side, side. 3 sides, side, side, side is congruent to side, side, side. So we just got to write the congruency statement, put them in the right order. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle. Now we got to figure out which angle, X, Y, or Z, matches up with angle A. Well, look at where angle A is placed. It's between the side with 1 tick mark and the side with 3 tick marks. So in the other triangle, which side or which angle is between 1 tick mark and 3 tick marks? Here's the 1, here's a 3, so that's angle Y. Y goes first. Now from A, we went to B, which was down the side with 1 tick mark. So from Y, we should go down the side with 1 tick mark to Z, which leaves x left. By side, side, side congruency. Last one, F. We have two triangles here. We have some congruent angles marked. Those two angles are congruent. We have two more congruent angles marked there. And notice again, DB is shared by both triangles, which means it is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. Now focus on just one triangle, maybe the top one. We have two congruent angles marked, and we have a side marked. Two angles and a side. Well, that means it's either angle, side, angle, or angle, angle, side. It depends on where the side is located. Is it between the two angles, or is it not between the two angles? Well, the angle is at angle D and angle B. The side is between the D and the B. So this is going to be angle, side, angle. And we can write our congruency statement. Triangle ABD is congruent to triangle. Now we ought to match up the letters again. Notice angle A is not one of the sets of congruent angles. It has no marking in it, which means it corresponds to the angle in the other triangle that has no marking, C. No marking, no marking. Then from A, I went to B, which is the angle with two marks. So from C, we should go to the angle that has two marks in the bottom triangle, which is angle D. And if we go from C to D, the only angle left is B. By angle, side, angle, congruency. Now it's very important that as you solve these problems, you mark your picture. Mark the congruent sides, mark the congruent angles. If there are vertical angles, mark them congruent. If there is a side that both triangles share, mark it congruent. If there is an angle bisector, mark them congruent. Mark your picture. I personally like to color in or shade in one of the two triangles. It helps me distinguish what rule it is, and it prevents me from what I call triangle hopping. For example, going angle, angle, angle. Well, this can't be angle, angle, angle because the third angle that I used is actually in the other triangle. So you must stick to one triangle when you determine the rule. I find that coloring it in or highlighting it assists me with that. And finally, make sure you know your 5 rules. They may or may not be given to you in the directions on the test or the quiz, so be sure. Side, 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 angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg. Make sure you have those 5 rules memorized and that you can identify them when given a picture.